Moving on from what's going on Twitter, we're getting into the topic of Mali. On Tuesday, reports of soldiers taking control of an army base filtered out of Mali. Senior government officials were arrested and tanks appeared on the streets of the capital, Bamako. Rebel soldiers detained Mali President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita and other government officials and drove them to a military base which they had seized. President Cyril Ramaphosa has since called on the military in Mali to release Keita and other government officials. As chair of the African Union, Ramaphosa called for an immediate return to civilian rule and for the military to return to their barracks. In recent times, we've seen similar events in both Sudan and Zimbabwe. To discuss why the transition of power in some parts of the continent occurs this way, we're joined by analyst Victor Kgomoeswana. Victor, thank you, and always a pleasure chatting to you. Welcome to Weekend Dawn on Channel 405. My first question is, why and what has caused the political unrest in Mali, considering that they had a similar coup all the way back in 2013?
It's, Jacob, good morning. It's always going to be the case. African countries, one, are not well run as a, not as a rule, but Mali has had problems. Remember, they have the Tuareg rebels to the north who are demanding the formation of an autonomous republic or an autonomous country. So to the north of the country, there's always been a demand for what you can call secession. I heard you refer to South Sudan. It's more or less the same thing, except these ones are just demanding something that is very hard to see how it's going to materialize. Secondly, unfortunately, when you remove someone by force, you're likely to be removed by force yourself. President Keita didn't remove anyone by force, but he came after a coup, and there have been complaints about his performance. And when elections are about to come through, you can expect people to start objecting. But mostly because of COVID, if I may say, without excusing the activity. Mali is a country that has been going through a lot of instability, and as a result of that, you have the demonstrations for the president to step down intensifying. The only sad thing is when the armed forces get involved, because once the armed forces get involved and call for the resignation of the head of state, who is their commander-in-chief, it means they are not willing to salute him, they are not willing to serve under him. So you have had a breakdown of relationship and trust.
Now, there is a mention of Sudan and the mention of Zimbabwe, and I want to specifically look at Zimbabwe right now and look at what's transpired since 2017. I remember people ululating and rejoicing in the streets when a similar coup took place and President Robert Mugabe was no longer in power. How sure are we that something similar won't happen in Mali? Because now the people of Zimbabwe aren't as happy as they were and as jovial as they were back in 2017.
There's a difference between wanting somebody out and who should replace them. The same thing in Zimbabwe. The army removes the President Mugabe, because at the time he was incapacitated. He was no longer of a sound mind, I'm sorry to say. He was no longer healthy enough to run a state, but he had been unable to turn around the fortunes of the country. Mali has a similar demand by the army. In Zimbabwe, it was not as violent as it is, where army officers started shooting. It was called a coup that was not a coup. In this case, it is a coup. They are saying they will work with opposition, they will work with everybody. I'm talking the armed forces now, to get a new government in. Now, once they have a new government in, there's no guarantee that the population, which is now ululating again in Bamako and all over Mali with the removal of President Keita, there's no guarantee that they will like whoever it is comes into power. Even if they are voted in democratically, like President Keita was voted in, they have to still deliver. And that's what you have in Zimbabwe. The government is battling with some of the social delivery services. They are battling with a forex problem, which can happen in any country. And if that happens, I believe we should agree or accept that people are entitled to protest and want whoever replaced the old leader to also go out. That's what democracy does. It gets messy, it gets irritating, but there are no guarantees. When you come into office, You've got to deliver according to your mandate and also according to the context. And I think African leaders are battling with the COVID context at the moment.
Victor, do you think there's been adequate international response to what's been going on in Mali? I do know that France has a number of troops out there in their thousands, as well as the USA. Do you think the international community should be involved or should be intervening in what's been going on in Mali?
Yes, it should be, and part of the question is how do they get involved? Remember, you are dealing with armed forces here. So when you get involved, Jacob, you've got to do it in a way that respects the man on the other side of the gun, because you don't want a shootout between the ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States. And ECOWAS has condemned this, and it has said, get the reinstatement of the old president. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But you need to be involved, as in listen to the demands of the people. The things have escalated to the point where you, as an external force, cannot demand what should happen. You cannot dictate. But at least you can say, let's work with you to make sure that we do not uphold the sense that you can always remove a president from power. I think the African Union has spoken. You mentioned also President Ramaphosa, who is the chairman of the African Union, Moussa Faki, who is the chairman of the African Union Commission, and that is the mechanism that runs the African Union. He has also spoken. I believe that the international organizations like the United Nations also added their voice. But the question is, how do you then get involved? You condemn, and then you call for the reinstatement, but you hope that the people of Mali will find common ground. Unfortunately, as we saw with President Mugabe, there are ululations in the streets of Mali as we speak, that people are happy about the removal. I can't say it's everybody, obviously, because he had those who agree with him. But I am happy that the international community is speaking. It's not like the silence that we sometimes see from the southern part of the world.
Let's talk about the future of Mali now, going forward. What will the transitional process be? Will there be a transitional government elected or a transitional leader? I know Colonel Assimi Goita has presented himself as the leader of the new military junta. Is he likely to be the new presidential or transitional president? How's that going to work?
I am reluctant to forecast what's going to happen. I am not claiming to be an expert on the issues of Mali, but Mali is one of those countries that have so many educated people and so many politically astute alternatives to whoever is in power. That country had an astronaut at one point as a prime minister. So it's very, very likely that there will be somebody stepping up. But for now, I'm a reluctant betting man, because you bet that something will turn out this way, and it doesn't always turn out. It's not like I've been keeping an eye on Mali on a day-to-day basis. But he might be an alternate. Once you are able to work with the people who have taken over power, you present this. But just remember, there are no guarantees that the process will unfold the way ECOWAS is demanding that it should unfold. By that I mean, remember, ECOWAS is saying reinstate the old president. So once you are having a stalemate like that, anything can happen.
Look, the West African region is, of course, vulnerable alone to jihadi movements. But for Mali specifically, does this leave them in a cold place or a vulnerable place for jihadists to try and also take over the power in Mali?
That's the problem with the Tuareg rebels. Remember, one of the reasons we have so many rebels in the countries like Mali, Niger, and those central West African the region is because to the north of almost every country, there's a North African country. What do I mean? To the north of Mali, there is Algeria. Algeria is in the same region as Morocco, as Libya, as Egypt. And if you recall, Jacob, 2011 was the year of the Arab Spring. So there were lots of overflowing rebel movement, because with the Arab Spring, there was a loss of control of armed forces coming from the countries that replaced their own presidents violently or that removed them by force. So there's always that free movement between some of the North African countries and the jihadist influence, the Al-Qaeda influence. And as a result, that's why you see, even in Nigeria, which has an installed government, you still have the Boko Haram problem. It's almost partly because of the Arab Spring, which sort of let loose some of the rebellion that we're seeing at the moment.
Let's wrap things up with the opposition. I know that the opposition leader, Somalia Sise, he reached out to his family for the first time ever since he was allegedly kidnapped in March this year. Do you think they'll be given a seat at the table when it comes to the transitional process of Mali? I know you're not a betting man, but what are your thoughts on this?
No. This is not about betting. Remember, once you've taken over power, like you saw in Zimbabwe, once you've taken over power, you want to present yourself, that is the military or the armed forces. You are presenting yourself as a broker of peace, whatever that means, as paradoxical as it sounds. So to be able to move Mali forward, the armed forces will have to work with everybody. If they start showing favoritism towards one party, either the governing party or the opposition or oppositions, they will be already nailing their colors to a certain political mast, which will mean they are no longer the armed forces, but they are a political party, which is what armed forces are not supposed to be. When you are the armed forces, you serve and protect the government of the day. You protect the state, which is what everybody owns a stake in. So they cannot be deciding as to who they will work with and who they will not work with. And the noises they have been making suggest that they are sensible enough to work with everybody. But just remember, the opposition might be more outspoken because it would have been on the receiving end of whatever President Keita was dishing out.
Consultant and analyst Victor Kgomoeswana, thank you so much for your time. He was speaking to us about the unrest in Mali and just looking at military coups across the continent in recent times.